What Transcona?
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and it's a pleasure to rise to speak to this motion today. A motion that highlights the importance of the relationship between Canada and the United States, something that I think all Canadians know very well, and particularly Canadians in business know very well, and many workers who either cross the border every day or who work in industries who have goods crossing the border every day. And so, I just want to start with that recognition of the importance of this relationship to the economic well-being of the country and beyond that as well, because those economic ties also create social and political ties that are important to keeping a kind of productive peace and partnership within the North American context. And certainly we saw over the last 4 years just how difficult life can get for Canadians when the administration in the United States is not of a view to respect and support and cultivate that longstanding relationship. We saw a number of problems come up, I think particularly of workers in the softwood lumber industry who, it wasn't a new problem under the U.S. administration, but I think it certainly put its stamp in the way that president was wont to do on the relationship and caused a lot of hardship for Canadian companies and workers here in Canada who really ought to be able to sell their products according to the terms and conditions that so many other goods are sold into the United States. And we continue to look for a resolution to that issue. We've had a number of governments of different stripes now who have turned some attention to that issue and come up short. I think of the Harper government, who abandoned successful suits through various trade agreements just on the cusp of victory, I think was the feeling of many people in Canada at the time. And then we saw a whole new comprehensive trade agreement negotiated with the United States in this last parliament, and an equal lack of success when it came to resolving some of the longstanding issues in the softwood lumber trade. So certainly focusing some attention of Parliament on this issue again in an attempt to come up with some real and constructive ways forward that aren't just about the politics of the issue, but are about how we can support Canadian workers in good jobs to be able to continue what they're doing, I think is always welcome. I think about workers in the steel and aluminum industry who, notwithstanding progress towards a trade deal that was supposed to cover these things, nevertheless had their industry seriously upset, a lot of anxiety and damage caused by tariffs that never should have been imposed in the first place, and that were imposed under the most specious of reasons. The claim by the previous administration that Canada was somehow a national security threat was just ridiculous to anybody who knew anything about the issue and didn't have a political agenda in the United States. And so, yes, certainly there are a lot of issues. It's an important relationship. It's something that we absolutely ought to be looking at. I do think, and I take note of the fact that we have a special committee right now on Canada-China. I think it bears mentioning, Madam Speaker, as many people in the House will know, that this has been an extraordinary time for Parliament, that has taxed the resources of Parliament. Folks who have been around for a while and are used to sitting on committees that sometimes will meet after hours or in the evenings will know that hasn't been possible, in part because the House resources are quite extended, providing service to our normal committees, to the House itself, and already to a special committee of the House. And we know that that's not just about bandwidth, but it's also about the very real people who support that work. And in this case, I'm talking especially about our interpreters. We've heard a lot of reports about the rate of entry among interpreters. There's a high vacancy rate now with our normal contingent of interpreters, and there was a story just at the beginning of this year, and we're not far into the year, about how the kind of substitute roster for our interpreters is beginning to see attrition as interpreters are injured. And part of that has to do with the amount of time that they're spending on Zoom. So there are issues about the, members using headsets and whatnot, but there are also issues about just the straight up amount of time that they're spending doing their job in this way with equipment that's not meant for it. So I do think that as members get excited about studying important issues, we ought to think a little bit about how we can use the existing time and resources of our standing committees. As the NDP's member of the Standing Committee on International Trade, I'd be very happy to take this up as a study through the normal committee process as well. So all that to say, I think it is important that we study the issue. I think you'll find New Democrats are very open to a discussion about how best to do that. And we recognize that House resources are also come into play, and that parliamentarians have a responsibility to think meaningfully about how we deploy our parliamentary resources to best effect. So as I say, I just want to reiterate again our openness to looking at different ways that we can ensure that we pursue the subject matter of the motion, but do it in a way that makes the most sense given the amount of resources that are available. I would say also when it comes to the motion particularly that it singles out a couple topics for an interim report. And I note that when we had the debate on the special committee for Canada-China relations, the House was not as prescriptive. It didn't single out particular issues. Now, I was saying earlier, and I think debate in the House previous to this will reflect the fact that the Canada-US relationship has many dimensions. Even if you're just looking at the economic relationship, there are a lot of different dimensions. And many of them are important to Canadians who work in all sorts of different kinds of industries. So while I certainly do appreciate the extent to which certain issues have come to the fore politically with the change in administration, I do wonder at the wisdom of being so prescriptive. I think one of the virtues of establishing the study is to have parliamentarians get a handle on what some of those major issues are after the benefit of hearing some testimony from players in that economic relationship, and then giving them the latitude to be able to decide when they think an interim report would be timely and on what issues they think an interim report would be timely. One of the things I failed to mention earlier in my remarks, but that I just want to come to now, Madam Speaker, is, in terms of just the study itself, whether it happens at the standing committee or whether it happens in some special forum, obviously the change in administration. So we saw how things can really take a turn with a more hostile administration in the last parliament. I think we're all looking forward to a more constructive relationship with a new U.S. administration, and that presents certain risks and opportunities. And so it is definitely a great moment to be looking at Canada's relationship with the United States, because there are a lot of opportunities right now. And while there are members who will want to focus on the negative side of some of those opportunities, particularly when it comes to the energy sector, and make hay out of the fact that a U.S. president followed through on an election commitment that also reflects a longstanding policy of his party. The fact of the matter is there are other opportunities opening up, and particularly when it comes to clean energy. The U.S. administration has announced a real desire to focus on the problem of climate change, and for many Canadians, that's a welcome emphasis. And I think a lot of Canadians would like to see their elected representatives giving some serious thought to the kind of economic opportunities that is going to open up. So happy about the environmental the hopefully positive environmental consequences of having a U.S. administration that's focused on the problem of climate change, but also to really now ask the question, what kind of economic opportunities does this open up over the next 4 years? And how does Canada position itself in order to take advantage of those economic opportunities to create meaningful employment for Canadians while we tackle the climate crisis here in Canada? Of course, talking about Buy America is very important at this time as well. That's, I think many of us feel that the new U.S. president's emphasis on Buy America, while not new, that's certainly something that America has often touted and has touted across different political lines. This new emphasis on that, I think, is rightly a worry to many Canadians who depend on access to the U.S. market in order to earn their livelihood. New Flyer Industries here in Winnipeg is a bus manufacturer. When we talk about automobiles, they sell the lion's share of their product into the United States. I think in their case, they've structured their business model already, knowing that there's always an emphasis on Buy America within the United States. And so, we're hopeful that their own kind of business planning will insulate them from that. But they're not the only company by far who's going to be affected by this. And so that's also why I think it's important. We want to talk about the opportunities that the new administration presents in terms of clean energy and transitioning away from fossil fuels and how we ensure Canadians get employed in that. But we also want to talk about the effects of the Buy America policy and the various industries that it's going to impact, and particularly the auto industry, which we know, if there's public procurement for buses in the United States as part of that clean energy program, we want to make sure that Canadian manufacturers, just as one example, are getting access to those opportunities. It's something that we've provided access to American companies to when we talk about Canadian procurement through CUSMA, but one of the glaring omissions of the Canada-United States-Mexico agreement was that Canadian companies don't get reciprocal access to American projects. So definitely that's something that needs to be fixed. What I would say is that I think when we get into Buy America, what we really get into is a discussion. And when we talk about CUSMA and how we were willing to sign on to an agreement as a country anyway, that left that gap, as it were, between our access to American public procurement and their access here in Canada. Part of it is driven by what I would call a blind faith by both Liberals and Conservatives over the last 30 years in this kind of globalized trade agenda. Globalized trade can have advantages, that's for sure, but it's not the be all end all. And I think one of the things that we see here when we look at the United States and Buy America is a country that talks about the benefits of globalized trade when it suits their interests, but doesn't put all their eggs in that basket. They've clearly been willing to defend their own economy and their own vital interests. When we look at vaccine procurement, we see again with the European Union moving to protect its vaccine supply. Well, they produce vaccines in Europe. We don't produce them in Canada. We didn't get on the exempt list for the countries that won't have these new European Union measures apply to them. There are some other countries that didn't, the US, Australia, the UK. What sets them apart from Canada? They have domestic vaccine production, because only in Canada did we have two political parties that are so committed to the global free trade agreement that they didn't do the job when they were in government of having real industrial plans for Canada and asking the question, even in the context of free global trade, how do we ensure that the nuts and bolts are taken of here in Canada? So Canada privatized and sold off a lot of its domestic vaccine production capability. There is some here in the country, but tellingly, Canada has waited in order to be able to access that domestic vaccine production capacity, didn't make the investments early on in the pandemic, and it sounds like we're going to be waiting at least a year in order to be able to begin producing vaccines here at all. That's a result of a kind of blind faith in a globalized trading system that even our trading partners don't don't have, Madam Speaker. I think of our government and how, instead of thinking about how to have a domestic plan for vaccine manufacture, their first thought was to go to the drug companies themselves and say, how do we pay more? This was reported early this year in the Globe and Mail. How do we pay more for more vaccine doses and for faster access from companies that are manufacturing in Europe? That was their first thought. In fact, it's some of that kind of behavior that may have given rise to the measures that the European Union ultimately took in order to protect their own vaccine manufacturer. That's because we have a government that first thinks of going to big corporations instead of thinking about the duty of government to regulate in the public interest and to make investments here at home. We have an airline industry that's in serious distress. We've had no plan at all for the airline industry from this government. A total laissez-faire approach, let the market decide, and if our airline industry isn't going to make it, it seems to be the position of the government, so be it. I mean, they offered the Canadian wage subsidy. They didn't get upset when some airline companies took that wage subsidy and then laid off a bunch of workers anyway. They don't have a plan for the industry. We're just meeting with people from the airline industry who represent workers in the airline industry who are talking about the fact that there's really no plan. This is a strategic sector. So, while we have other countries that we trade with, and the U.S. is among them, who are interested in, liberalizing trade, if you'll permit the phrase, Madam Speaker, they don't do that at the expense of having a plan for key industries that are the backbone of their economy. They don't do that at the expense of being able to manufacture important things like vaccines. Canada has been the sucker for 30 years now when it comes to international trade, because Liberals and Conservatives alike have bought the line, hook, line, and sinker, instead of realizing that our trading partners are talking free trade when it suits their interest, but they actually have a domestic plan for how to deliver good jobs to their people and how to deliver on the public health needs of their population. So absolutely, Madam Speaker, let's talk about all of those things, but let's give the committee the real breadth that it needs in order to be able to decide those priorities as it hears from witnesses. So with all of that in mind, including a willingness to talk about where the study takes place, but also some of the ways that we think that the study might be improved by putting some emphasis on new opportunities presented, not just the risks presented by the new administration in the United States, I would like to propose the following amendment to the motion, Madam Speaker. So I move that the motion be amended, A, in subparagraph 2, by replacing the words softwood lumber exports and related jobs with the words clean energy, softwood lumber exports and related jobs within a context of the global climate crisis. B, in subparagraph 3, by adding after the word policies, the words and their impact on the Canadian economy, including the automobile industry. And C, by deleting paragraphs K and L.
The honourable member has a seconder?
I do, Madam Speaker. I believe it's seconded by the member for Burnaby.
New Westminster Burnaby, Madam Speaker.
Pardon me for the omission.
You'll make that mistake, apparently. It is my duty to inform honourable members that an amendment to an opposition motion may be moved only with the consent of the sponsor of the motion. Therefore, I ask the honourable member for Kelowna Lake Country if she consents to this amendment being moved. The honourable member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank the honourable member. I do want to thank him for all of his work on the International Trade Committee. And, there are numerous committees which could take on those suggestions for study. This special committee would be very focused. So therefore, I respectfully do not support the motion for the amendment. Thank you.
Since there is no consent, therefore, pursuant to Standing Order 85, the amendment cannot be moved at this time. Questions and comments? The honourable member for Thornhill.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my colleague for his speech. And I was pleased to hear him refer to our former Harper government, because as a member representing a beef exporting province, and although it was a bit before his time, I'm sure he fondly recollects our successful World Trade Organization challenge against the Obama administration over the issue of country of origin labeling. And I wonder if my colleague believes that the proposed committee would be the ideal spot to consider the remarks just yesterday from the new U.S. Agriculture Secretary, who is the same Agriculture Secretary who imposed the cool ruling against Canada, Buy America, who has said that he is open to again imposing country of origin labeling against countries like Canada.
Honourable Member for Elmwood-Transcona.
Well, thank you, and thank you very much for that question. I certainly appreciate why Canadian producers would be concerned about that, and I think it does make sense to have their Parliament investigate those issues and try and come up with constructive solutions. I would say that I think that is an excellent point, and it's another reason why it makes sense not to constrain the committee to provide interim reports with deadlines on particular issues now, because I think there are issues like that as the committee begins to investigate the entirety of the economic relationship between Canada and the United States, we'll find do become priority items. I mean, we're still within the first 100 days of the administration in the United States. They've said that, although they've acted on some things already, they're going to be acting on many more things in the days to come. And so I think it makes sense to keep the mandate for this committee as open as possible, so that as the administration announces new initiatives like the one the member just announced, that the committee is free to be able to take up those issues as they arise and to issue interim reports as it sees fit.
Have to allow others to ask questions. The Honourable Member for the Yukon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to, the member made a good point, but there's other exciting opportunities with the new administration. I just want to mention three that I don't know that anyone else will mention, or I'll have time to speak today. Although I know the member for Saanich Gulf Islands, I'm sure she'd support. But we have management agreements with the United States on porcupine caribou, on polar bears, and on migratory birds. And in particularly related to the porcupine caribou is protecting the 1002 lands of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge and the calving ground of the porcupine caribou herd, the Canada-U.S. porcupine caribou herd that's so essential for the Gwich'in people. So hopefully the member would think these are also important Canada-U.S. exciting potential positive opportunities for the new Biden administration, who actually did an executive order the first day they came in related to protecting the ANWR. Thank you.
Member for Elmwood-Transcona.
Well, thank you to the member, and I think it was exactly in that spirit that we proposed our amendment, which was to say let's not just focus on the risks that come with a new administration, because there are always risks with any new administration, but let's also try and talk about some of the positive opportunities that are there, and particularly in respect of the environment. I think this change in administration offers some really great opportunities, whether they're in the energy, whether it's about energy or about other issues. There are things that we need to be thinking about in terms of having an administration that's more environmentally friendly and focused on climate change, and I think it would be good for this committee to ensure that an important part of its work isn't just concentrating on the risks, but also on the opportunities.
The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to congratulate my colleague from Elmwood-Transcona for his presentation. He seems to consider quite a bit the health and safety of the interpreters. To his credit, Does he think the best way is to go through a committee that would look at these issues? Or perhaps it's not as important to all Canadians and Quebecers who are asking lots of questions about the pandemic itself. Thank you.
Transcona.
Je pense que les enjeux soulevés par la motion sont.
I think the issues raised by this motion are very important. It's a question of having a conversation about how we can study these issues in the best possible way. So it's just to underscore that we do have different options, and there are consequences, administratively and even human costs in terms of the decisions we make. And we're open to different solutions, but I think it's important to remember these challenges and the consequences of the decisions that in normal times wouldn't be as negative, but in the current situation, there's a need to work virtually, and this does have additional consequences.
For New Westminster, Burnaby.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank my colleague for his excellent speech. He talked about opportunities, and as a former energy worker, I know that the building trades have indicated that the clean energy industry in the United States is going to quadruple over the next decade. And with the Biden administration, of course, there is a whole host of opportunities for clean energy, Canadian clean energy exports. So I'm a bit perplexed why the Conservatives would shove that aside and not want to hear, want to have the committee investigate that important new export industry for clean energy. I wanted to know the thoughts of my colleague from Elmwood Transcona on what the building trades has said will be an incredible boon to the Canadian economy if we take advantage of it.
The Honourable Member for Elmwood Transcona.
Sure. I mean, I think for those members who are interested to look, there's been a number of reports and studies that have emphasized the potential for job creation when we make serious investments in fighting climate change. So sometimes that's in renewable energy construction. So that can be wind turbines, that can be solar farms. But it's not just that, and nobody's saying that it's just that. It's also the massive potential that you can unlock when you get serious about retrofitting our existing buildings that contribute a significant share of our greenhouse gas emissions. So when you get serious about doing residential and commercial retrofits, you're talking about taking all the you're not waiting on some technology of the future. You're talking about using the existing jobs of real tradespeople that are already trained to go and to make our buildings more efficient. Every dollar invested in that is a dollar invested in creating jobs right here at home. Now, how does that work with respect to the United States? I think that's a great question for study. And I think because there will be competing demands for the materials in order to affect all those retrofits if the United States is going that way as well, and Canada should be.
Have to give one more member the opportunity to ask questions. The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you. I thank my honourable colleague from Elmwood Transcona. I certainly would have supported the amendments that he put forward. It occurs to me that it's passing strange that the arrival of new President Joe Biden seems to have cast a pall over our parliament, that almost every comment is negative. I totally agree with my friend from the Yukon. Thank heavens Biden signed an executive order to protect the shared porcupine caribou herd and its shared habitat. Why are we not celebrating that there's a president in the White House who actually is concerned about the climate crisis? That we could only have similar resolve from our own government, because the climate crisis threatens our economy and our very survival. Thank you to my honourable colleague for any comment.
For Elmwood Transcona, 10 seconds.
Well, thank you for that question. I think you sum it up by a lack of imagination. I think there's a lot of people in this country that can't fathom the enormous economic potential of making the investments we need to make in fighting climate change. And for those of us who do appreciate that economic potential, it's mind-boggling that we haven't gone further down that road a lot faster, because we can create a lot of jobs